While they pitied poor Mom living in their musty basement, they had no idea I was worth over $11 million, a secret my son and daughter-in-law would only discover after they had already begun making plans to move me to Golden Sunset. Assisted living when they found my basement too much of a burden to maintain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've saved something truly special for you. Mom, we need to talk about something important, my son, Michael said, settling into the worn armchair I'd kept from my old house. His voice had that careful gentleness people adopt when delivering news they expect will be upsetting. At 73, I recognized the tone immediately. I'd heard it increasingly often since moving into his basement 5 years ago after my husband William's death. My daughter-in-law Cynthia perched on the arm of his chair, her manicured fingers resting supportively on his shoulder. "We've been thinking about your living situation, Eleanor," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "and we believe we've found the perfect solution." I set down my crossword puzzle and removed my reading glasses, taking a moment to study them both. Michael, at 48, had his father's strong jawline, but my cautious nature. Cynthia, 5 years younger, was immaculately put together as always, her blonde hair freshly highlighted, her casual outfit likely costing more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. The diamond tennis bracelet glinting on her wrist was probably worth more than everything I visibly owned, or so they thought. What solution would that be? I asked mildly, though I suspected where this conversation was heading. There had been hints for months, comments about the basement stairs being too steep for someone my age, observations about how I might benefit from more social interaction with peers, casual mentions of friends whose parents had just blossomed in retirement communities. "We've been looking into Golden Sunset assisted living," Michael explained, leaning forward earnestly. "It's that beautiful new facility near the lake. They have apartments with emergency call buttons, daily activities, transportation to medical appointments, everything you could need. And a beauty salon right on the premises," Cynthia added brightly, as if that might be the selling point that would convince me. "They even have a spa day every Thursday. Wouldn't that be lovely, Eleanor?" I glanced around my basement apartment, the space I'd carefully arranged to suit my needs after selling my home in Maryland. It wasn't luxurious by any standard, but it was comfortable and private. A bedroom, small sitting area, compact kitchenette, and a bathroom Michael had renovated to include grab bars and a walk-in shower. The ceiling was low and the windows were small, but it had been a practical solution during a difficult transition after William's sudden heart attack. What they didn't know was that I had maintained the modest beachfront cottage William and I owned in the Outer Banks, a property now worth nearly $1.2 million that I visited on bus trips with my seniors group twice a year. Those group trips were actually peaceful solo retreats where I could enjoy ocean views from the wraparound deck and make private calls to my international investment managers without fear of being overheard. "That's very thoughtful," I said carefully, "but I'm quite content here. The arrangement has worked well, hasn't it?" Michael and Cynthia exchanged that look, the silent communication between spouses that excludes everyone else. I'd shared such looks with William during our 42 years of marriage. "Mom, we've been happy to have you here," Michael began. "But we need to think about the future. What if you fell on those stairs? What if there was an emergency and we weren't home?" "I haven't fallen once in 5 years," I pointed out reasonably. "And I have the emergency button pendant you insisted I wear." I tapped the device hanging around my neck, though I kept silent about how often I forgot to put it on. I also didn't mention that I regularly did Tai Chi and strength training when they weren't home, exercises that kept me far more physically capable than they assumed. Cynthia leaned forward, her expression professionally sympathetic. As a pharmaceutical sales representative, she had perfected the art of appearing deeply concerned while steering conversations toward predetermined outcomes. Eleanor, the basement is becoming difficult to maintain properly. There are issues with humidity control, and the dehumidifier needs constant emptying. The space was never really designed for long-term living. This was a new angle, suggesting the problem was the space rather than my ability to live independently. Clever, but transparent. I empty the dehumidifier myself every day, I countered. It's hardly a burden. But it shouldn't be your responsibility at your age, Cynthia insisted with that same practiced smile. And frankly, Michael and I are thinking about our future too. Emily will be heading to college in 2 years, and we've been considering downsizing ourselves. Ah, there it was, the real motivation emerging. My granddaughter Emily's education would be expensive, especially with her heart set on East Coast universities. Michael and Cynthia lived well but not extravagantly on their combined incomes. The substantial equity in their suburban Chicago home could certainly ease anticipated financial pressures if they downsized. What they didn't know was that I had already established a $750,000 educational trust for Emily that would cover not just her undergraduate education but graduate school as well, should she choose that path. The paperwork was filed with my attorney, scheduled to be revealed on her 18th birthday, still nearly 2 years away. I see, I said simply, not revealing my thoughts. And this Golden Sunset place, what are the costs involved? Michael pulled a glossy brochure from his pocket, unfolding it on the coffee table between us. They have several options depending on the level of care needed. The basic independent living apartment starts at $4,200 monthly, which includes meals, housekeeping, and activities. I maintained my neutral expression, though the figure was precisely what I had expected, substantial enough to strain my apparent resources, but not so exorbitant as to seem immediately impossible. Based on what Michael and Cynthia believed they knew about my finances, this would consume nearly all of my visible monthly income. That's quite an expense, I observed mildly. My Social Security and William's pension don't amount to that much. We know, Michael acknowledged, seeming relieved I'd raised the financial aspect myself. We've been looking into options. There's long-term care insurance, and some of your investments could be restructured for better income generation. My investments, as far as Michael knew, consisted of a modest IRA worth perhaps $180,000 and a few certificates of deposit I'd mentioned over the years. These were real accounts, but they represented less than 2% of my actual net worth. The majority of my assets were held in a complex network of trusts, offshore accounts, and investment vehicles that I had carefully structured with top financial advisors over decades. I'd need to think carefully about disrupting my investment strategy at this stage of life, I said, deliberately vague. Stability has always been my priority. Cynthia nodded with the exaggerated understanding one might show a child. Of course, Eleanor. That's why we've already spoken with our financial advisor about your situation. Bradley thinks he could help restructure things to generate the necessary income without touching your principal. The presumption was breathtaking. Consulting their advisor about my finances without my knowledge or consent. Yet it wasn't surprising. Since moving into their home, I'd noticed a gradual shift in how they perceived me. From independent adult to dependent elder, someone whose decisions required oversight and correction. What would they think if they knew I had consulted last month with the former Secretary of the Treasury about tax optimization strategies for my international holdings? Or that 3 major energy companies still paid me 6-figure consulting fees annually for my expertise in geological assessment of potential drilling sites? That's thoughtful, I replied neutrally. But I prefer to work with my own advisors. On financial matters? You have financial advisors? Cynthia asked with poorly concealed surprise. I thought William handled all that before he passed. The assumption was telling, and unfortunately common for women of my generation. Despite my advanced degrees and professional accomplishments, Many people presumed my husband had managed our finances simply because that was the norm for our age group. William and I made decisions together, I corrected gently. But yes, I've maintained relationships with our advisors. This was true, though Edward Sullivan at Goldman Sachs managed only my visible domestic accounts, not the more substantial holdings elsewhere. My primary wealth manager, Sanjay Patel at Blackstone, handled the portfolio that neither Michael nor Cynthia knew existed. It wasn't entirely their fault that they underestimated me. I had perhaps encouraged this perception by settling into the role of the grateful, undemanding mother-in-law. I cooked occasional meals, helped with housework, babysit Emily when needed, and never imposed my opinions on household matters. This deference had seemed the price of harmonious cohabitation in a home that wasn't mine. More significantly, I had never corrected their assumptions about my financial situation. When William died, I told them only that he had left me comfortable with his pension, insurance, and our savings. This was true, but dramatically incomplete. What I never mentioned was my own highly successful career as a petroleum geologist, one of the few women in the field when I started in the late 1970s. I didn't speak of the patents I held on several extraction methodologies, the consulting firm I established after leaving ExxonMobil, or the strategic investments I'd made in emerging energy technologies. Most importantly, I never disclosed the offshore accounts and diversified portfolio that had grown steadily over decades of disciplined saving and informed investing. This privacy wasn't deception for its own sake. It stemmed from values formed during my early professional years, when being a woman in a male-dominated industry taught me that financial details were best kept private. William had understood and shared this philosophy. We lived modestly while building substantial wealth, finding satisfaction in security rather than display. "Mom, we're just trying to help," Michael said, bringing me back to the present conversation. "We worry about you down here all alone. At Golden Sunset, you'd have companions your own age, activities, and medical staff if anything happened." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the genuine concern beneath his presumption. He wasn't being malicious. He truly believed he was looking out for my best interests. The problem wasn't his intentions, but his assumptions about my capabilities, needs, and resources. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, folding the brochure and setting it aside. "But any changes to my investments would require careful consideration. I'd need to speak with my advisors first." Michael looked simultaneously relieved and concerned. Relieved that professional financial guidance was already in place, concerned that it might complicate the plan he and Cynthia had evidently spent considerable time developing. "That's good. Mom, maybe we could all meet with your advisor together? Bradley could coordinate with them to ensure we're considering all options." The thought of Bradley, their 30-something financial planner who specialized in suburban family portfolios, coordinating with Sanjay Patel, who managed billions in assets for ultra-high net worth clients internationally, almost made me smile. They existed in entirely different financial universes. "Perhaps," I said noncommittally. "I'll need time to think about this Golden Sunset possibility. It's quite a significant change to consider." They exchanged another of those looks. This one communicating mild frustration at my lack of immediate enthusiasm, but also confidence that I would eventually be brought around to their viewpoint. "Of course. Take some time," Cynthia said, standing to signal the conversation's end. "But don't wait too long. Golden Sunset has a waiting list, and we were only able to get you on it because my client Sandra works in their administrative office." As they headed upstairs, leaving the brochure purposefully on my coffee table, I remained seated, contemplating the conversation and its implications. Their concern wasn't entirely self-serving. There were legitimate reasons to consider whether a basement apartment remained appropriate housing for a woman in her 70s. Yet their approach, making plans without consulting me, presuming financial decision-making authority, treating my independence as negotiable, revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood both my capabilities and my circumstances. I picked up the glossy brochure and examined the photos of Golden Sunset's amenities. The facility looked pleasant enough: landscaped grounds, comfortable common areas, smiling seniors engaged in various activities. But what struck me most was how institutional it felt despite the upscale marketing. The independence it offered was carefully managed and substantially limited. Residents lived within parameters set by others, their choices narrowed to menu options and activity schedules. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent decades making high-stakes decisions that influenced global energy markets. I had testified before congressional committees, negotiated with foreign governments, and managed teams of brilliant but often difficult engineers and scientists. Yet here I was, being guided toward a future where choosing between bingo and watercolor painting would constitute a significant decision. Later that evening, after the house had quieted, I sat at my small desk and opened my laptop, a modest Dell that gave no hint of its specialized security features. Using a complex authentication process involving multiple security keys and biometric verification, I logged into my primary investment management portal. The screen displayed a consolidated overview of assets that would have astonished Michael and Cynthia. Investment accounts totaling just over $8.2 million. Real estate holdings worth approximately $3.4 million, and intellectual property royalties that generated roughly $340,000 annually. A notification indicated that my quarterly dividend payment from my early investment in a renewable energy startup had been deposited, another $86,000 added to accounts that already held more wealth than Michael and Cynthia would likely accumulate in their lifetimes. I had invested in solar technology long before it became mainstream, recognizing its potential while still working in the fossil fuel industry. William and I had built this wealth methodically over decades, living below our means while holding executive positions at major energy companies. We purchased investment properties in emerging markets, diversified into technology and healthcare stocks before they became obvious choices, and maintained the discipline to reinvest rather than spend during market upswings. The basement apartment, where I now sat with its aging furniture and limited natural light, was entirely incongruous with my financial reality. I could purchase a luxury condominium outright, maintain homes in multiple countries, or live in high-end retirement communities that would make Golden Sunset look austere by comparison. Yet I had chosen this modest existence, initially from practical necessity during grief, then from a desire for family connection, and finally from simple habit. The arrangement had served its purpose, providing proximity to my granddaughter during her formative teenage years and giving me time to adjust to widowhood without the burden of maintaining a house alone. But Michael and Cynthia's well-intentioned intervention had clarified something important. The current situation had created a damaging imbalance in our relationship. Their perception of me as financially vulnerable and increasingly dependent had undermined the mutual respect essential to healthy family dynamics. I opened an encrypted folder containing photos from my last seniors bus trip to the Outer Banks. Actually, a meeting with my international investment team at my beachfront property. There I was, dressed not in the simple slacks and cardigans I wore in Michael's home, but in tailored business attire, reviewing portfolio projections with advisors who treated me with the deference my expertise warranted. The disparity between these two versions of my life had once seemed necessary and even amusing. Now it felt increasingly like a charade that served no one well, least of all me. The question wasn't whether I could afford Golden Sunset. I could purchase the entire facility if I desired, but whether continuing to conceal my financial reality served any positive purpose. The privacy that had once felt prudent now seemed to be enabling precisely the kind of protective overreach I had always abhorred in others' treatment of elderly family members. As I closed the laptop, I realized I had reached a decision point. Maintaining the status quo was no longer viable, but neither was simply acquiescing to their plans for my future. What I needed was a strategy, one that would reestablish appropriate boundaries while preserving family relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me. Throughout my professional career, I had navigated complex situations involving powerful personalities and competing interests. I had managed multi-million-dollar projects and negotiated with government officials across 3 continents. Yet somehow, addressing this family dynamic felt more challenging than any corporate boardroom I'd ever entered. I glanced at the small collection of photos displayed on my desk, mostly family images that reinforced the grandmother identity I presented in this house. Hidden among them, however, was a picture of William and me at the White House Energy Innovation Award ceremony, where my work on extraction efficiency had been recognized by the president. Michael had never asked about it, assuming perhaps that we had attended as guests rather than honorees. Tomorrow, I would begin developing my approach, methodical and measured, as I'd been taught in engineering school and had practiced throughout my career. The outcome couldn't be predicted with certainty, but one thing was clear. The assumption that I needed rescuing from financial limitations was about to be definitively corrected. What I couldn't have anticipated was how quickly circumstances would force my hand, or that the catalyst would come not from Michael and Cynthia's continuing pressure, but from the innocent curiosity of my 16-year-old granddaughter Emily, the one person in the household who still treated me as a fully capable individual with a life and identity beyond grandma in the basement. The morning after Michael and Cynthia's golden sunset proposal, I awoke to the familiar sounds of the household above me stirring to life. Michael's shower running, Cynthia's hairdryer humming, Emily's music playing just loudly enough to assert teenage independence without triggering parental intervention. The rhythm of their morning routines had become as familiar to me as the subtle seasonal changes in light that filtered through my small basement windows. I followed my own morning ritual, gentle stretching exercises learned from the physical therapist I privately consulted. Another detail I hadn't shared with Michael: a cup of strong black tea and a review of financial news on my tablet. Global markets had reacted overnight to a policy announcement from the European Central Bank, a development that would require adjustments to my European holdings, something I would address during my secure call with Sanjay later this morning. Before that call, however, I needed to follow through on my decision to begin reasserting boundaries with Michael and Cynthia. The Golden Sunset brochure still lay on my coffee table where they had strategically left it, a silent reminder of their expectations. I picked it up and tucked it into my desk drawer. I wouldn't be needing it. Upstairs, the front door opened and closed twice in quick succession, Michael leaving for his software company, Cynthia heading to her pharmaceutical sales meetings. The house fell momentarily quiet before Emily's footsteps descended the stairs. Unlike her parents' carefully measured interactions with me, Emily's approach to our relationship had always been refreshingly direct. "Grandma," she called from the top of the basement stairs, "are you decent? Can I come down?" "Of course, dear," I replied, quickly closing the financial news app and opening a more innocuous word puzzle game. "I'm just having my morning tea." Emily bounded down the stairs with the physical confidence of youth, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her school uniform somehow managing to look both rumpled and deliberately styled. At 16, she balanced on the edge between childhood and adulthood, still collecting plush animals but also deeply engaged with climate activism and international affairs. "Mom says you're moving to Golden Sunset," she announced without preamble, dropping onto my sofa and helping herself to one of the butter cookies I kept in a tin on the coffee table. "She was telling Dad last night that it's basically a done deal, just a matter of helping you accept the inevitable." I suppressed a smile at her perfect imitation of Cynthia's professionally empathetic tone. "Is that what she said?" "Pretty much verbatim." Emily studied me with surprising perception. "But you're not going, are you? What makes you think that?" She shrugged, reaching for another cookie. "Because you don't need their help the way they think you do. I've seen you reading those financial reports when you think no one's watching, And you speak French on the phone sometimes when Mom and Dad aren't home. Her observation caught me off guard. I had always been careful about maintaining my grandmotherly persona in this house, saving my business calls for times when I believed everyone was out. Clearly, I had underestimated Emily's awareness and observational skills. "You're quite perceptive," I acknowledged, deciding honesty was the best approach with her. "I do have some international investments that occasionally require attention." "And you speak to people in French about them?" she pressed, clearly intrigued by this glimpse of a grandmother different from the one she thought she knew. "Some of my business associates are based in Paris," I explained, seeing no reason to obfuscate. "It's more precise to communicate with them in their native language." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "Business associates? Grandma? What exactly did you do before you retired? Mom always just says you were in the energy industry like it was some boring office job." The question presented an unexpected opportunity, a chance to begin re-establishing my actual identity within the family, starting with the member most likely to accept it without judgment. "I was a petroleum geologist," I said, watching her expression. "I specialized in identifying viable drilling locations based on geological formations. Later in my career, I ran my own consulting firm advising energy companies on exploration strategies." "Wait, seriously?" Emily sat up straighter, cookie forgotten. "That's actually really cool, but also kind of controversial now with climate change and everything." "The science itself isn't controversial," I clarified. "Understanding Earth's geological formations is neutral knowledge. How that knowledge is applied, however, raises important ethical questions. Questions I've become increasingly engaged with in recent years." I didn't mention that my engagement included substantial investments in renewable energy companies and funding university research on carbon capture technologies. Those details could wait for another conversation. Emily seemed to be processing this new information about her grandmother, reconciling it with the image she had previously held. "So you weren't just Dad's mom or Grandpa William's wife. You had this whole career I never knew about." "Many women of my generation balanced family responsibilities with professional ambitions," I said gently. "We simply didn't always foreground our accomplishments the way younger generations rightfully do now." She nodded thoughtfully, then glanced at her phone and jumped up. "I'm going to be late for school. Can we talk more about this later? I have so many questions." "Of course," I agreed, touched by her genuine interest. "I'd like that very much." After she hurried upstairs, I sat considering this unexpected development. Emily had inadvertently provided me with an opening to begin revealing aspects of my identity that had remained concealed in this household. Her natural curiosity might serve as a bridge toward broader family understanding of who I actually was, professionally, personally, and financially. The house now empty, I returned to my desk and initiated the secure call with Sanjay, discussing adjustments to my European portfolio in response to the ECB announcement. We also reviewed progress on establishing the research foundation I had been planning, a significant philanthropic initiative focused on developing affordable clean energy technologies for emerging economies. "The legal framework is nearly complete," Sanjay informed me. "We just need your decision on the initial funding level and board composition." "I'll provide those details next week," I assured him. "There are some family matters I need to address. First, that may influence the timing of the public announcement." After concluding the call, I opened my personal email to find a message from Barbara Chen, the current CEO of Chen Geological Consulting, the firm I had founded and later sold to my top executives when William and I semi-retired. Barbara was letting me know that the company had been approached about a major assessment project in Norway, and the client had specifically requested my involvement as a senior advisor. The timing was either fortuitous or problematic, depending on perspective. Taking on the Norway project would require travel and a level of professional engagement that would be impossible to conceal from Michael and Cynthia. it would effectively force the conversation about my actual professional status and financial situation that I had been contemplating initiating more gradually. I had just begun composing a response to Barbara when I heard the front door open and close upstairs, followed by Cynthia's voice calling out, "Eleanor, are you home?" Her return was unexpected. Her sales route typically kept her out until late afternoon. I quickly closed my email and secured my computer before responding. "Yes, I'm down here." Cynthia's footsteps descended the stairs, her high heels tapping, precisely on each tread. She appeared in my doorway holding a stack of papers and wearing the determined expression I recognized from previous helpful interventions. "I had a cancellation with Dr. Rosen's office, so I thought I'd use the time to get started on some of the Golden Sunset paperwork," she announced, settling uninvited at my small dining table and arranging the forms in neat piles. "They need quite a bit of financial information to process your application and determine what additional assistance programs you might qualify for." The presumption was breathtaking, proceeding with applications without my agreement, assuming I would need financial assistance, preparing to disclose my private information to third parties without my consent. Yet her expression held no awareness of crossing boundaries. She genuinely believed she was being helpful. "Cynthia," I said carefully, "I haven't made any decision about Golden Sunset. I appreciate your research, but completing applications seems premature." She waved off my objection with the practiced air of someone accustomed to overcoming client resistance. "It's just preliminary paperwork, Eleanor. Getting everything started now means you'll have priority when you're ready to make the move. Besides, Sandra can't hold your spot indefinitely." I observed her for a moment, noting how her entire approach positioned me as a problem requiring management, rather than a person with agency and preference. This interaction crystallized my growing certainty that half measures would be insufficient. The misperceptions underlying our family dynamic required direct correction. "I won't be moving to Golden Sunset," I stated firmly, meeting her gaze directly. "While I appreciate the concern behind your suggestion, that living arrangement doesn't align with my preferences or needs." Her expression shifted from confident efficiency to the patient tolerance one might show a child refusing medicine. "Eleanor, I understand change is frightening at your age. Everyone feels that way initially. But Michael and I have researched this thoroughly, and Golden Sunset truly is the best option for your situation." "My situation?" I repeated evenly. "And what exactly do you understand about my situation, Cynthia?" Something in my tone finally registered, causing her to look up from the forms with slight confusion. "Well, we know that maintaining independent living will become increasingly challenging. The basement stairs are already difficult for you, and your fixed income simply won't cover the kind of in-home assistance you'll eventually need." "Both of those assumptions are incorrect," I replied, maintaining my composure. "The stairs present. No difficulty whatsoever. I actually use them for exercise when the house is empty. And my financial resources are considerably more extensive than you appear to believe." Cynthia's expression shifted between confusion and the kind of sympathetic concern that actually masked dismissal. "Eleanor, there's no need to be embarrassed about financial limitations. Many people in your generation didn't have the benefit of financial planning resources that are available today. That's why Michael and I want to help." Her condescension, however well-intentioned, strengthened my resolve. "I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my circumstances," I said, rising from my chair. "Perhaps it would be best if we discussed this when Michael is home as well. Could we plan for a conversation this evening?" She hesitated, clearly trying to interpret my unexpected resistance. "Of course, if that would make you more comfortable, but these forms really are time-sensitive." "The forms won't be necessary," I interrupted with gentle firmness. "This evening, I'd like to clarify some aspects of my situation that may not have been apparent to you and Michael." After Cynthia departed, visibly puzzled by the interaction but taking the forms with her, I sat considering how best to approach the evening's conversation. The gradual revelation I had been contemplating would need to be accelerated. Emily's discovery and Cynthia's presumptuous paperwork had effectively forced my timeline. I spent the afternoon preparing, gathering key documents that would provide irrefutable evidence of my actual financial and professional status. The challenge wasn't assembling proof, I had abundant documentation, but rather determining how to present information that would fundamentally alter family perceptions without unnecessarily damaging relationships or creating resentment. By 5 o'clock, I had created a concise overview of my financial holdings, professional accomplishments, and current business engagements. I had also prepared responses to the questions and objections I anticipated from Michael and Cynthia. Why hadn't I shared this information earlier? Why had I chosen to live in their basement if I had such substantial resources? What did this revelation mean for our current living arrangement? As I reviewed these materials, my phone chimed with a text message from Emily. Dad just got home and Mom is talking his ear off about you being difficult about Golden Sunset. Whatever you're planning, I'm on your side. Her message brought an unexpected smile. Despite being the youngest family member, Emily had demonstrated the greatest ability to see me as a complete person rather than a role or responsibility. Her support, while unanticipated, was welcome. Shortly after 6, Michael's familiar knock sounded on my door. Mom, can we talk for a minute? I opened the door to find him standing there alone, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. Cynthia mentioned you had some reservations about the Golden Sunset paperwork. I thought we might discuss it before dinner. Actually, I replied, I'd prefer to have one conversation with both of you. Is Cynthia upstairs? She's finishing dinner preparations, he confirmed. We could talk afterward if that works better for you. That would be fine, I agreed. And is Emily home as well? She's at soccer practice until 8, he said, seeming slightly puzzled by the question. Did you need her for something? Not specifically, I answered honestly. But what I have to discuss affects the